This is Solve It for Kids.
Hello, my amazing and curious friends. My name is Jennifer, the Dean of all things STEM and STEAM, and this is Solve It for Kids, the podcast that gives kids and families a peek inside the real world of scientists, engineers, and experts as they solve problems in their jobs using creativity, cooperation, and critical thinking. And now please welcome to the show my podcast partner, Galactic Space Geek, Jeff Gagne.
Hello, Jennifer, and hello, listeners. Galactic Space Geek Jeff is very excited for today's episode because we get answers to questions every space geek has wanted to know more about.
Oh, that is absolutely true. What problem are we solving today?
How do you slow down a spaceship?
How do you slow down a spaceship? That's true. This is a question I have always wanted the answer to. Who is our guest today, Jeff?
Our guest today, who won't speak at 25,000 miles per hour, is the awesome Julie Wolfson. She is Senior Staff Systems Engineer at Lockheed Martin, and in layman's terms, she is the Orion program's risk manager.
Awesome. Welcome to the show, Julie.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Well, we are excited to have you. I mean, first of all, if you listen to the show at all, you know Jeff and I are huge fans of Orion, Lockheed Martin, Artemis, everything space, like everything
Good.
Space.
Awesome.
So we are thrilled to talk to you about Orion, but I always like to start the show with, did you always know as a kid that you wanted to work on spacecraft?
I did not. I knew I wanted to be in something science related.
Okay.
I feel like I had the same dream as every other girl of my generation, which was I'm going to be a marine biologist.
Oh, yes, I had that. I did have that.
Nice. And then, you know, as you grow older and you look at what am I going to major in college and how much money do these people make? And marine biologists
Yes.
don't make very much
No,
money.
they don't. Unfortunately,
Right. So turns out I was really good at math and I took an aptitude quiz and it said, hey, you know what? You'd be a really good mechanical engineer. And I went, okay, I'll major in mechanical engineering. So I did that. Yeah. I worked in the automotive industry before I worked in space. And then things happened and I moved and got married and moved again. And now I work on space. So I kind of fell into it, but I love it. And I don't ever not want to work on space stuff anymore.
That's awesome.
So I have to ask, because you mentioned the aptitude test and, you know, kids and students are taking those all the time and, you know, it's a test for them. So they're not really paying too much attention to it. When you got the results of that, were you surprised by it, or did you already know you kind of had the aptitude and you liked what that was?
A little of both.
Okay.
I wasn't too surprised by it, but I was disappointed that the top three were all different, you know, aspects of engineering. Like one was mechanical and one was biomedical. And so I don't know. I guess I thought it's going to tell me something really fun that I've never heard of before, and it didn't.
Right. Okay. That just gives our listeners a good idea for when they're taking those tests that you're going to know some of that information, but maybe you pay attention to it and it leads you somewhere really cool.
Right.
Yeah, definitely.
So you decided to be a mechanical engineer, and I'm curious, you started in the car industry, and I read a little bit about that, and you really liked working with cars. Can you tell us some of what you did initially there?
Yeah, I worked at a tier 1 automotive parts supplier who made hose and tube assemblies that went on cars. So we provided parts to General Motors and Toyota and Ford, and it was a more fast-paced industry than space. So in a year, I could, as a product engineer, get a drawing from General Motors, for example, and say, hey, yes, we can make that part for you. Here's what it'll cost. And get the factory set up to make that part, start making that part, see it installed on cars and then be driving around and go, I have a part on that car. I have a part on that car. But with space, not so much, right? Because we won the Orion contract in 2006.
Right.
And we couldn't really point to, hey, look at our spaceship launching until 2014.
Right.
Wow.
But it's not just 1 year.
No, it's not. No, it's not.
No, but it does level up the coolness factor.
Yes,
Absolutely.
absolutely.
Look at my spacecraft versus look at my sedan.
100%. Yeah.
So,
No offense to cars.
of course
Yeah.
not. We all get around in them.
So you are the Orion Risk Manager. Can you explain to us, what does that mean?
Right. So
Ah,
risk is all around us all the time, right? Every time we get in the car to go to work or school or soccer practice or whatever, there is
Right.
a risk, right, that you will get in an accident or that you will get a
Yes.
flat tire or something will happen. And you have to balance these risks, right? Is it worth getting in the car if I'm going to have a flat tire? Well, probably, yes, it's worth getting in the car.
As opposed to
So-
walking or riding your bike miles.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly. Unless you live in the city and you can
Right.
walk everywhere, but I don't. So, but when you are putting people into space, there is way more risk
Yes.
than
yes.
driving somewhere, to go get something to eat. So we have to manage our safety risks, our technical risks, and then there's also kind of a finance side of things. There is a risk that
Yes.
we will cause a schedule delay because something went wrong, or there is a risk that, this first design didn't work and we're going to have to redesign something and that's going to cost more. And so, so we've got these 4 aspects of risk that we have to manage on the program: cost, schedule, technical, and safety.
What kind of scale? How do you quantify those risks to manage? Because, like you were saying, with human space travel, like the risk is quite literally astronomical. How do you put that in a scale for, say, a Lockheed Martin to understand and work with at your desks as you're trying to do your jobs?
That is a really good question. NASA tells us how to do that. It is in our contract
Okay.
with NASA, and they say you will quantify risks based on these things. You will figure out what you think the probability of that risk happening is.
Okay.
And so if you picture a graph,
yes.
on the left-hand side, they say from the top to the bottom, very high likelihood, high, moderate, low, very low.
Sure.
Right?
Okay.
And on the bottom, they have you rate the consequence if the risk were to occur. And they have a
Okay.
scale for cost, right? If it
Yeah.
occurs and it's going to cost $5 million, it's a whatever score. And if it's going to cost $100 million, it's another score. And that
Sure.
the same goes for schedule and technical and safety. And so you kind of, if you remember your multiplication tables and you go, I'm going to find 10 over here and 7 over here, and where they meet, that's the answer.
Right.
We have a risk scorecard and it goes from 1 to 25.
That is totally understandable.
Yeah.
So this
Yep.
sounds like a lot of math, right?
Yeah. Yes, it is math, but I enjoy it.
And also, when you do this, can you give us an example? So our question is, how do you slow down a spaceship? So I'm assuming one of the risks, of course, is reentry. So can you talk to us a little bit about that? And do you also develop ways to mitigate that risk? In other words, lower it?
Absolutely.
Okay, good.
Absolutely. When you've got a risk that's, 20 or over, you definitely have to plan for, well, how are we going to get that risk into something that we are willing to accept? So thankfully, there were other spaceships before Orion who paved the way for us a little bit, right?
Yes.
So we know how to slow down a spaceship. However,
Right.
the last spaceship that NASA had that sent humans up into space was the shuttle, and it re-entered the atmosphere differently than
Yes.
Orion does, and it had wings, and it just glided
Yep.
down and landed on a runway because it had wheels.
Yes.
Right.
We don't have that. We are a capsule. We're a capsule, kind of like Apollo was,
Right.
and so we assumed we would use the same methods as Apollo,
Right.
except
Okay.
Okay.
we are bigger and heavier than
Yes.
Apollo.
Yes.
And so a couple years into the design of Orion, we realized, oh my gosh, we don't have enough room in the forward bay, which is the very top of our kind of cone-shaped capsule,
Right.
for all of the parachutes and the uprighting bags, which are kind of those balloon-shaped things
Right.
that
Yes.
after Orion splashes down, there's these red balloons that kind of show up. Apollo only had 3 of those. We have 5 of those. And so
Oh.
we
Okay.
did not have enough room for all of the things we needed to make
Oh,
it safe
no.
to land.
That's probably big risk happening
Yeah.
right there.
Big risk. So instead of just saying, you know what, we can live with that. We can't live with that.
No.
We literally might not be able to live
Right.
with that. So,
Yes.
so a team of diverse engineers with various experiences and specialties was put together. And the main thing that we decided to change at that point was the outside, the kind of walls of the spacecraft. We made the spacecraft wider. So if you can
Okay.
picture an ice
Ah.
cream cone, right? You've got some that are really skinny and pointy, and then some that are a little wider, and you
Yes.
can fit more ice cream in the wider one.
Right.
Yeah. So we changed our outer mold line, is what it's called, by
Okay.
2.5 degrees. And that
Oh.
meant we could fit everything that we needed in.
I love that
Oh.
analogy. Everybody's going to be able to picture exactly what was going on in your meeting room.
Yeah.
That's great. So, how many parachutes does Orion carry?
Orion has 11 total parachutes.
Wow.
11.
11. But you probably can't picture in your mind how we have 11
No.
parachutes.
No,
Even
I'm
if you
picturing
watched,
3.
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
So there are 4 different kinds of parachutes on Orion, and they
Oh.
start their work after the heat shield is finished doing its work.
Okay.
So
Okay.
Orion enters the atmosphere,
Right.
coming back from the moon at over 25,000 miles an hour.
That's
Whoa.
crazy.
If
I
you were to
know.
stick some parachutes out at 25,000 miles an hour, they would just rip right off the spaceship.
Yes.
And they,
Well, that
they
was a
would
waste
not.
of time.
No. Yeah.
Exactly. So our titanium heat shield has a coating on it that is designed to burn off in a controlled fashion. And
Okay.
it does the work of getting the spaceship down from 25,000 miles an hour to about 320 miles an hour.
Oh,
Wow.
wow.
So that's
Yeah.
it's like slamming on the brakes. Woof.
Yes, it is exactly like that. Exactly like
Whoa.
That's a
Yeah.
strong parachute.
So,
that.
well, that's the heat shield
Yeah, that's
stopping
the-
it. Yeah,
yeah.
but then when so still when you're going 300, what'd you say, 320 miles?
About 320.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
that's still fairly fast for a parachute.
Yes.
It is
Sorry, I
very
jumped ahead.
fast.
Do they
No, it's fine.
all come out at once?
No,
Right? Or
no, there is-
okay. How does
There's
that work?
a controlled sequence of parachutes.
Okay.
So when we're at about 320 miles an hour, we're 26,000 feet above the surface of the Earth.
Okay.
And 3 parachutes pull off the cover of that forward bay that we were talking about
Right. Okay.
earlier,
Okay.
which is where all of the stuff is packed in. So
Okay.
3 parachutes pull that off and away from the spaceship.
Okay, so
Okay.
that's 3 already. Very
Yeah.
That's
good.
3, right? Then at about 20, so that happens at 26,500 feet. At 25,000 feet, 2 drogue parachutes come out. And the drogue parachutes are what really slow down and stabilize the spacecraft.
Okay.
Okay.
And
When
they
you say
get,
stabilize, sorry to interrupt. When you say
Yeah, yeah.
stabilize, what does that mean?
well, it means we don't want the spacecraft to be swinging like a pendulum underneath those
Okay.
parachutes. We need it to
Okay.
really, be 100% the
Kinda
heat
coming-
shield facing down at
Right.
the planet,
Okay.
right?
Okay.
Understand.
Okay.
Yep. So
Okay, so after the drogue parachutes.
yes, so those are the drogues get the vehicle down to about 300 miles an hour.
Okay.
Okay.
Then those go away. They're ripped off. They go away.
Well, no
Okay.
wonder we don't know there's 11 because they all
Right?
just fly off.
They
Yeah,
just-
yeah. Right. So then we're in free fall again. And then there are 3 pilot parachutes that pull out the big main parachutes. So Their only job
Oh.
is that they are guiding the main parachutes to come out of the spacecraft. And as soon as the mains come out, the pilots are gone. And then the
Okay.
three main
Okay.
parachutes open up in a reefed manner. They don't just automatically fully get as big as they can,
Right.
because again, that would just cause them to rip off, right? It has
Yes.
to be
Okay.
gradual.
Yes.
So the three mains come out at about 9,000 feet above the earth and 130 miles an hour. And they do
Okay.
the work to bring the crew module from about 130 miles an hour to about 17 miles an hour, which is the speed where it finally splashes down.
Okay.
Wow.
Wow. That is a very cool progression
Yeah.
that I really think most of us, most listeners have never learned about before, because most of us know those three,
Right. That's what I
the
say.
final parachutes, because that's when Lockheed Martin's and NASA's and all the news cameras finally catch, oh, there it is. There's the
Yeah.
capsule. And
Yeah.
we all
Oh, the
kind of
orange and
know-
white stripes.
Yeah,
That's
Exactly.
the one.
We all kind of know that
Yeah.
moment on the screen,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
there's so much that has to happen before that happens.
So,
Yeah.
So, I mean, I'm curious, are you one of the people, or is your team, or like, who determines the timing? Because it seems like the timing has to be fairly
Yes.
precise. Like, you don't want to be going too fast and poof,
Bye-bye
the
parachute.
parachutes go early, right? Like,
Right.
wow,
Well,
that's cool
yeah.
to figure all that out.
Yeah, there are people that do way more mathematical analysis on that sort of thing than I
Okay.
do, but they were part of that team that said, how are we going to solve
Right,
this problem when
right.
we don't have room for our parachutes? But yeah, there's a special team that goes off and does that. And again, we have the Apollo heritage that we
Yes.
can lean on
Okay.
and say, well, what altitude did Apollo's main parachutes come out and all
Oh,
How
that.
much
So-
heavier are we?
right.
Right.
Does
And,
that mean we need to do higher?
yeah.
Okay.
Exactly.
So with the list of 11 parachutes, bringing that back into your job as the risk manager, I'm assuming more parachutes equals more risk, but
Correct.
it sounded like you need each one of those things to happen. So can you talk a little bit about sort of figuring out that equation of how do we do, like, why are there 11? Why not 6 or why not 26?
Yes. And we did delve very deep into that, right? We said, well, gosh, having 11 parachutes and having 4 different types of parachutes,
Yes.
that's way more ways for us to have a mistake happen,
Right,
to have
right.
something go wrong. But we have models that we can plug all of our data into and
Mhm.
say, if we were to do this 1,000 times, how many times would it not work?
Okay.
And it turns out that there are kind of cooler and more interesting and more streamlined ways of slowing down a spaceship and having it land at 17 miles an hour in the ocean. But this configuration that we landed on is the most reliable. And when you have people in your spacecraft that you don't want to get hurt, you want to go with the most reliable
Okay.
way. So
Love that answer.
Yeah.
So it kind of was, yes, it's more expensive, and yes, it might take us longer, but it is so much safer for our astronauts.
Right. And that's the point that I want to make, because even in, like when I go and talk to kids about books and space and everything, not everybody talks about the money. And that has to be it has to be a factor. Everyone's like, oh, even certain people at certain agencies have billions of dollars. There's still a certain amount of money you can only spend and kind of make this all work. So can you kind of talk a little bit about balancing all of that? Like, are you given a budget? Like, you have to hit this budget, or, kind of, I'm just curious.
Yeah, we say to NASA, we are going to build this, and this is what it's going to cost. And they say, okay, build that, and we will give you exactly that amount of money. But when we say that we are going to build this, and this is what it's going to cost, we've made some assumptions when we do that. And NASA knows that.
Right,
and so
right.
as we develop things, if it turns out that our assumptions were incorrect, or that something is different on maybe say on SLS, the rocket that we launched on,
Right.
right? Maybe SLS sends over some data and says, hey, turns out you can't be as heavy as you want to be. You need to be 100 pounds lighter than that.
Oh,
or we can't get you up to
wow.
space. We can say, okay, we can do that, but you need to pay us money
Right.
to figure out how we are going to get 100 pounds out of our spaceship.
Which is probably not a small feat, I would imagine.
It is not. It's a big deal. So
That
in those
Wow.
cases, we can go back to NASA and say, hey, we didn't know this at the time. You know that we didn't know this at the time. And they go, okay, this is what we can do.
So, yeah, that really sounds like a balancing act where
Right,
you're
yeah.
juggling a lot of balls.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you a question going back to the parachutes.
Okay.
The main parachutes, the one that we see the most, and
Mhm.
everybody gets the beautiful pictures in the video of, there seem to be holes that are already in those parachutes. Those holes must be there for a reason, correct?
Yes, they're there on purpose.
Why are holes in a parachute? Because most, when I talk to kids, they're like, the parachute's supposed to catch air, and turns out holes let the air go through. That doesn't sound right.
Right. Because if the parachutes were to catch all of the air,
Yep.
it's again one of those things that it would be too much force on the parachutes.
Right.
Okay.
And, either the vehicle would flip over or the parachutes could rip off. And so we had to make it so that those parachutes captured exactly the right amount of air. And that's what those holes are for.
I
Yeah.
understand.
Well, and then I'm curious because you say that Orion hits the water at 17 miles per hour. Did you determine that number because that's the lowest risk speed for the astronauts inside? Or is that that's kind of what you could slow it down to? I mean,
mostly that's what we could slow it down to.
Okay.
And then tests are done on kind of a mock-up of the crew module with mannequins and dummies inside of it, with sensors on them to see, what forces would you experience as a human inside Orion if it were to splash down at 17 miles an hour. And so it was kind of, this is how slow we think we can get it. Is that safe enough? Yes, it is. It turns out it is safe enough. So, like you said, it is all a balancing act.
Well, so you're testing every single aspect of this and then reevaluating, right? Like changing and all that kind of stuff
if
too,
necessary.
If
necessary. But we did many drop tests. We did drop tests of not the exact crew module, but something that was the same size, shape, and weight as the crew module. So we dropped, crew module dummies kind of out of airplanes and said, see what happens with these parachutes. We also had a flight test, it was called Exploration Flight Test 1, EFT1, that we did in December of 2014. And we launched on a different launch vehicle from SLS. SLS wasn't ready yet, and it was only a 5-hour-ish mission. And so we were able to get Orion to come in to the atmosphere kind of hotter and faster than it would come back, for example, from the International Space Station. And we were able to test all of our parachutes in our configuration then, and it worked great then.
Yay!
So
you guys were all happy, right? Like, look, But Artemis 1 that just happened in the fall, right? That it was a 25.5-day mission, and Orion went further than it had ever been before. It went over 1 million miles total. It went further away from Earth than any other human-rated spacecraft had ever been. And it came in hotter and faster than anything else. And it actually did a maneuver called a skip entry that Apollo was able to do, but never did, which basically has Orion coming in and kind of bouncing off the atmosphere. And then going back up a little bit. And then when it comes back the second time, it has slowed down a little bit. So the skip entry helps us slow things down as well. And then everything worked again on this past test, which is great because late next year, we are putting crew into Orion. We're putting 4 people on board, and we're going to fly Artemis 2 around the moon. And the crew should be announced. Those 4 members of the crew should be announced in the spring of this year.
Very cool.
So
That's
we're
very
looking
exciting.
forward to that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
you were just talking about the actual Artemis 1 mission. Lots of our listeners know about that. Did the parachutes for bringing Orion back down for the actual Artemis 1 mission, how well did they work?
100%. They worked exactly the way we wanted them to.
Excellent.
I'm guessing
That
there
is
were lots
wonderful.
of very happy Lockheed Martin employees at your watch
Yeah,
party
in
for
fact,
that, right?
in fact, yeah, the watch party was amazing, and it was off campus, so we were allowed to bring family and friends. So we were able to bring our
Nice.
daughter and kind of watch it happen live, and it was great. And just
And-
so many years of working on a project, and
To finally
And-
see it happen.
yes,
Wow.
yes.
And I have to ask, because we talked about this before, did you say, that's my spaceship, right? Like with
Yeah,
your
but everyone
heart.
in the
Did
room,
you say that?
everyone in the room at that point was saying, "That's my spaceship."
That's fantastic. I
Yeah.
think that's amazing. So now everything looks great, I assume, for the next launch for Artemis 2.
We are on
And-
schedule and getting everything ready. That crew module and service module are already at Kennedy Space Center and undergoing the last bit of testing that they need to do. And we're already building Artemis 3, 4, and 5. They're all in
Wow.
various states of production. So
That's exciting.
That's so exciting.
yeah, it's exciting. So soon I'll be able to not have, more than a decade before I can go, that's my spaceship, right? We'll be launching more often and I'll be going, that's my spaceship. Oh, that's my other spaceship.
Very good. So Artemis 1 worked 100%. Everything was great with the parachutes. You just mentioned Artemis 2 is already there. Those parachutes are already there. 3, 4, and 5 are getting built. So the spaceship is not going to change, but I imagine your team is still going to collect all sorts of data from the spacecraft and its launch and its landing to make sure that everything is still working the way it's supposed to and no tweaks need to be made?
Yes, I wouldn't say the spaceship isn't going to change, but it isn't going to change in
Significantly,
ways.
maybe. Gotcha.
Right. There's going to be crew on Artemis 2,
Right.
and they're going to need a couple of systems working that we did not have on Artemis 1. So some of the life support systems and some of the displays that
Right.
crew will need to
Right.
look at to gather data and see what's
Right.
happening on the spaceship. And not all of those were on Artemis 1. So that's
Okay.
a change
Right.
between Artemis 1
Right.
and 2. Artemis 1 didn't have any docking hardware on it. And Artemis
Okay.
2 and 3 and beyond are all going to have that
Yes.
hardware. And Artemis 3 especially is going to have docking hardware that works, because it's
Yes.
going to be docking with something in lunar orbit that will
Yes.
allow them to leave Orion, go into this other vehicle, and land on the surface of the moon. So Artemis
Right.
2 crew gets to orbit the moon and
Right.
look at it and come back.
Yes.
But the Artemis 3 crew gets to land on the moon. And Artemis 3 is when the first woman and the first person of color are going to get to
Yes.
land on the moon.
Yes,
So
that is-
exciting.
it is, yeah. It's so exciting and thrilling to watch all this. I remember when the first space shuttle went up. And I loved the space shuttle. And I was like, when that project ended, I was like, oh no, what are they gonna do? And now we have something just as cool, if not cooler, right? It's so exciting.
I think so.
I do too. I mean, it's amazing. Jeff and I were both at the first Artemis launch. We are now hooked. So we
Yes.
will probably be at all of them now.
Huge Artemis
Nice.
fans.
Even if we have to
Nice.
peer through the gates, we will be there.
Right, yeah. I was there too, but I think in our emails, you actually had a better viewing spot than I did.
I was by the Saturn V. Jeff was over with the NASA social people. So we were kind
okay.
of we were
It
kind
was
of
right next to the VAB.
Yeah.
Oh, and I was near the Saturn V, but I was on those bleachers, and you had like a nice lawn to sit on, Jen.
Yeah, it was, but the grass was wet. So,
Yeah, okay, good point.
I mean,
Good point.
it was
Yeah.
still a great view.
But how cool was that launch?
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
It was amazing.
It is
Yeah, I
something
took
for
my-
our listeners to look
Yeah.
forward to
Yeah.
for Artemis's 2, 3, 4, 5, etc.
Yeah. If you can
100%.
see one in person, it's just unbelievable.
Yeah, I took my daughter out of school. I said, I don't care how many days you have to miss. This is very
Nice.
important, and you're going to learn stuff
It's history.
just like you would be learning in school. And yeah,
I mean, it was history in the making.
exactly.
Well, we could talk about Orion and Artemis forever. But we are at the time in the show where we ask our guests to give our listeners a challenge. I'm very curious what your challenge will be for our listeners, Julie.
Okay. Our challenge is trying to imagine how big those 3 orange and white striped Orion main parachutes are.
Right.
So calculations have been done, and it turns out that if you were to lay those parachutes out flat, kind of side by side,
right,
they would cover almost an entire football field. So
wow.
Yeah.
That's
so
huge.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So the next time you're watching a football game on TV, or you're at a football game, or you're driving past a football field, just try to imagine that almost the entire area between the 2 end zones covered by parachutes. That's how big
that's crazy.
they needed to be to land safely.
Well, and also, like, the space that they're all like pushed up into, right?
Yeah. So that is another really fun fact. So our parachutes are packed using a hydraulic press, and all of the parachutes are packed that way, but specifically the 3 main parachutes, once they are packed by that hydraulic press, they are the density of oak wood. So if you have oak floors, or if you have an oak tree in your yard or in a park near where you live, and you were to knock on that wood, that's how hard those parachutes are packed in.
Oh my goodness.
Wow.
Yeah. So they come out with this huge explosive force, I would imagine.
Yeah. And they're so thin. The material is so thin, you can almost see through it. So to think about something that is so light and thin being packed to such a dense,
then being able to stop a spacecraft that's still moving so fast.
Yeah, that's a great challenge. I hope all of you guys do that, and just and then maybe go, like, I literally have hardwood floors that are, made of oak. So I'm, but think about all of that. That's really cool. Maybe imagine if you could do something like that. Wouldn't that be cool? That would be very cool. Well, Julie, this has been such an amazing conversation.
This has been wonderful.
Thank you so much for being on Solve It for Kids.
Thank you for having me.
No matter how much of a space geek you are, there is always more to it than you think. And I knew about parachutes, and I even knew about drogue parachutes. But the amount of science and engineering that goes into precisely slowing down a spaceship, especially when it's rated to have human beings in it, is absolutely critical and is fascinating to learn.
Just a little bit critical. But I mean, so I didn't know as much as you about the parachutes, but I loved learning all of the engineering. And as you said, the timing has to be a certain, this one has to go on, and then this one, and then this set. And it has to go in a certain order so as to slow the spaceship down to the proper, the lowest speed that it has before it splashes down to make everything safe. It's so cool to understand all of this engineering now. And I had no idea how big these things were until Julie gave us her challenge, right?
Nor did I. For being Galactic Space Geek Jeff, every time I drive by my daughter's middle school now, I see their football field, and all I can picture is the Orion spacecraft landing on the 50-yard line and the parachutes covering the field.
Right?
Those are enormous.
And it's so amazing that they can create this and, again, like, layer everything. I mean, wow. So I want all of you guys to do the challenge the next time you go by a football field and just imagine these 3 parachutes spread out. I mean, that's really, really huge. But also be sure you check out our website, solveitforkids.com, because we will have a page with this episode on it, and we'll have some video of the Orion landing so you can see some of the parachutes coming out. And also, if you guys have any comments about how big the parachutes are, or did you see them if you happened to be on that side of the world, or did you watch them on TV, tag us on our social media. We are at Kids Solve at Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter.
And if you enjoyed this episode, we have several other episodes that relate directly to the Orion spacecraft. go give those a listen as well. Until next time, you'll hear Jen and Jeff on
Solve it for kids.